Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Hebrews 13, verse 2. This morning, I want to recall a story that a few of you may have heard me tell before. A story from several years ago when I was working for an immigration legal services nonprofit called American Gateways. It's the story of an asylum seeker. I'll call him Mikkel. That's not his real name, though. Mikkel fled his home country with a family member because they were being persecuted, even receiving death threats because of their religious beliefs. When they got to the U.S., they immediately approached immigration officials and requested asylum. Immigration officials immediately put them into immigration detention. That's where we first met Mikkel, at the T. Don Hutto Immigration Detention Center in Taylor, Texas. He was 2 years old at the time. He turned 3 in the 7 months that they held him and his mom in the T. Don Hutto facility, which at the time was used to house entire immigrant families. Just after Mikkel turned 3, we represented them before the San Antonio Immigration Court, and the judge granted them asylum. None of us got to celebrate, though. The Attorney for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, immediately appealed the decision. They locked shackles on Mikkel's mom's wrists and ankles as he sobbed in terror, not understanding what was happening to his mom, and they took them back to the prison for immigrants. Mikkel's mom refused to give up and accept being deported, so we decided that we had to try something else. A few days later, we had a conference call with that ICE attorney, and all of a sudden, he decided to withdraw the appeal and admitted that their request for asylum was likely valid. We think that his change of heart may have had something to do with the call he'd gotten from a national reporter earlier that day. How that reporter found out about Mikkel's story, as well as how she got that ICE attorney's direct office phone number, remains shrouded in mystery. I'm afraid these days even that wouldn't work. Several years later, Mikkel was living in a big city on the East Coast where his mom had gotten a good job. He'd become very proficient with his English and was making great grades in school. We know all this because Mikkel's mom sent an update in a letter to American Gateways on how they were doing. Enclosed with the letter was a photograph of a bright, smiling Mikkel. Paperclip to the photograph was a check for $1,000, a contribution so that, as Mikkel's mom put it, the organization could help others like her Mikkel. Thereby, some have entertained angels unawares. Today is Mother's Day, and while we celebrate the many terrific moms in this congregation and beyond it, as the reading you heard earlier describes, there are folks who are also hurting for a variety of reasons on this Mother's Day. I can't help but think of my own mom and the pain she must be feeling going through her first Mother's Day since we lost my stepdad, Ty. I wanted to start with Mikkel's story today because it was one that was part of a public relations campaign and a legal battle that a broad coalition of human rights advocates fought several years ago to force ICE to discontinue family detention at Hutto. And they did. We won that one. On this Mother's Day, though, the victory has turned out to be short-lived. We have not only come full circle, but it has gotten much worse. Today, hundreds of immigrant women and their children, some of them infants, are spending Mother's Day imprisoned in a detention center in Karnes City, about an hour southeast of San Antonio. Many of these women and their children, like Mikkel and his mom, fled persecution and death threats in their home country, only to be re-traumatized when they came here asking us for asylum, asking for our help. And as if that's not enough, A little over an hour to the southwest of San Antonio, in Dilley, Texas, ICE has just opened another detention facility. This one will eventually imprison up to 2,400 immigrants, many of them women and children also. Just last Saturday, several members of this congregation participated in a rally to protest this facility and to call for an end to all immigrant family detention. That T. Don Hutto Center I talked about earlier now houses up to 400 immigrant women, again, many of them asylum seekers, who will be spending this Mother's Day separated from their children and families. It's hard for me to even imagine which would be worse, to be separated from your children or to be locked up with them, not knowing for how long. Now, people who come to the U.S. and ask for asylum have done nothing illegal. In fact, what is illegal, according to U.S. law and international human rights treaties, is this prolonged detention of asylum seekers while their cases are processed. And even in the vast majority of instances where immigrants have come for other reasons, such as harsh economic conditions in their country of origin, they have at most committed an immigration misdemeanor, the equivalent of getting a traffic ticket. I wonder what would happen if they started holding white people in prison for 8 months while their speeding ticket cases got processed. There's excellent research that shows that supervised, community-based alternatives to immigrant detention work extremely well. Immigrants comply with the law, they show up for their immigration court appointments, and these alternatives are far less expensive than the over $2 billion in U.S. tax dollars we're spending each year on immigrant detention. Yet, for-profit prison companies like the GEO Group and Corrections Corporation of America, who run Carnes City and Dilley, respectively, have discovered that the millions that they spend on lobbying at the local, state, and federal level have really paid off and turned this country into the detention capital of the world, earning them billions in our tax dollars. In fact, their efforts have resulted in our incarceration rate being nearly 5 times greater than most other countries, greater than the country of Rwanda. They have successfully lobbied, for instance, for Congress to require that over 34,000 immigrants must be held in immigration detention at any given time in this country. They were also involved in ICE declaring that the women and children in Carnes and Dilley are national security threats. National security threats. Strange how often we label as dangerous felons and national security threats people who happen to have brown or black skin, isn't it? Felicia Kongabel, one of our several church members who visit immigrant women and children in detention facilities, described the following to me about the Carnes City facility. Women who have risked everything to follow their maternal instincts and get their children out of life-threatening situations, only to find themselves locked up with up to 3 other women and all of their children in a room about the size of my office at this church. Infants not being allowed to crawl past the doorway of that room. Water that tastes like salt and chlorine. Food the children don't like and that doesn't provide proper nutrition for them at these important developmental stages of their lives. Mothers having to spend the tiny amount they can earn doing work for the prison to buy more food for their kids from the commissary and bottled water at $1.75 a bottle. When many of the women went on a hunger strike to protest their prolonged confinement, they made sure their children were still eating. Still, even after that, the guards told the women, if you don't eat, we'll say that it proves you're an unfit mother and we will take your children away from you. Children depressed, children distraught over seeing their mothers treated like criminals. an interior courtyard that is surrounded on all four sides by two-story building walls as the only place that the children can go outside. They can't even see trees or the horizon. Young children seriously talking about committing suicide by throwing themselves off the second-story balcony of those walls I just talked about. And in fact, Felicia and the others that I talked with for this sermon told me of so many horrors that these women and their children had experienced, first in their home countries and then at the hands of our government and these private prison contractors, that I can't possibly fit them all within one sermon. Even worse, immigration officials are denying most asylum cases and issuing deportation orders for entire families, despite the fact that they know they are likely to be hurt or killed if they're returned to their home country. I really wish I could let some of these immigrants speak for themselves today because they have shown such great courage. I can share with you, though, with their permission, the words that one of them wrote down. My name is Bobby. That's not his real name. I changed it. I am 11 years old. I've been threatened and taunted because I have a language problem. Children at school have teased me, bullied me, hit me, and taken my money. At times, I would come home from school with my clothes torn and dirty, and I would be so depressed that I didn't even want to leave the house and never wanted to go back to school. My schoolmates are a part of a gang who were also taking money from my mom. Even our neighbors, we think, are members of the gang, and they've threatened to harm us. They have said they would kill me because they think I am a homosexual. When my sister tried to defend me, they threatened and mistreated her too. As children with a woman alone, there is no one to protect us. If I have to go back, we believe the gangs will follow through on their threats and harm us because they can. The police are either unwilling or unable to assist us, and so we are defenseless in our country. When Bobby's mother brought him and his sister here to ask for asylum, we locked them up in the Karn City Detention Center, despite the fact that they'd already been issued an initial finding of a credible fear that they would be harmed if we send them back to their country. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. And yet we do the opposite. We bind the angels, we clip their wings, and far too often we toss them back into a torturous hell on earth. When I was a kid in school, we were taught about episodes in U.S. history that had come to be thought of as stains on the soul of the nation. The slaughter and subjugation of natives, slavery, of course, Jim Crow, lynching, imperialism, McCarthyism, the Japanese internment camps. And in our time, I fear that the polluting of our national soul is escalating, a cancer spreading through our very core. The disproportionate execution of black lives by law enforcement, a criminal justice and correction system gone wild, and these modern-day internment camps imposed upon immigrant women and their children, these are all just different manifestations of the same cancer, a cancer that is rooted in racist and classist systems that in turn support an excessively unequal distribution of wealth and power. But on this Mother's Day, in our time, I think we have a choice. After all, we are still living our time, and we can rise up together, a chorus of voices crying out in harmony. This is not the history we will allow to be written. This is not the story we will allow to be told about our time. This will not continue in our name. This makes a mockery of the values that we were told are at the core of this country. This violates the principles that we as Unitarian Universalists hold dear. We have a different vision. A vision of beloved community wherein all people are enabled to live lives of dignity, where we act from a spirit that there is enough for each of us rather than out of this culture of scarcity that we've inherited. We have a vision. We have a vision of offering hospitality to strangers, treating them as if they very well might be angels among us. Now, I know that challenges like these can seem so huge and overwhelming. It's easy to lose hope. It's easy to feel that one person can't possibly make a difference. I will tell you, though, that there is hope. We have won against family detention before, and recently a federal district judge ruled that, in a preliminary ruling, that immigration family detention must stop. The final ruling is in less than 30 days, and I have no doubt that those private prison contractors and the forces that fear the stranger will be working hard to appeal or find another way around that decision. So now is the time to make our voices heard. At the social action table today after the service, you can meet a representative of grassroots leadership, one of our partners fighting against family detention, and you can get information about how to join in on their efforts as well as many of our other partners. And while you're there, be sure to find out about the Immigration Action Group inside Amigos we're forming right here at the church. I think that Peggy Martin would be happy to tell you about that. From participating in campaigns to call for an end to family detention, to visiting these women and children, to supporting their legal costs, to providing backpacks and supplies for the kids if they do get released, our many and varying efforts all added together really can make a difference. On this Mother's Day, in this our time in the history that is yet to be written, we have never had a greater opportunity. We have never been more called to nourish souls, transform lives, and do justice. May this be so. May this be the story that we write together. See ya at the social action table.